Hello and welcome to our Facebook Live on student visas. My name is Alfred Bohl and I represent Education USA and the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C. Today's program is part of a series of conversations to help provide international students with the most relevant information and topics on American higher education. If you are interested in studying in the United States, our Facebook Live discussion will help you better navigate the application process for getting a student visa. Joining me today is Laura Stein. Laura is a visa policy expert in the State Department's Bureau of Consular Affairs. Also joining us virtually is Lee Seedorf, the Senior Director of International Student and Scholar Services at the University of Iowa. If you have questions you would like Laura or Lee to answer during the program, just post your question in the comment section next to the video player. Laura and Lee, thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to begin by asking each of you to describe the work you do. Lee, could we start with you?
Yes, thank you. I'm very happy to be here today. So at the University of Iowa, we have about 4,000 international students from over 115 different countries. We're a typical international office. The things that you should look for when considering going to a university, we do things from the point students are even considering coming to any university. We've got some great webinars available to students. Once people are admitted and decide that they're going to attend here, we have a lot of pre-arrival information for them. We have orientation services. Once students are here, we of course help students with immigration and visa issues throughout the course of their studies. But one of the things we're most proud of and really enjoy is a lot of intercultural programs and workshops that we create for students to help with the cultural adjustment process, a lot of ways that we try to connect domestic and international students. So those are the kinds of things students should watch for when they're considering attending a school in the U.S.
Thank you, Lee. Fantastic introduction. Laura, could you tell us a little bit about the work you do with Consular Affairs and give us some best practices and tips for navigating the visa process?
Sure, absolutely, Fred. So I work in the visa office, and our job really is to provide policy and procedures. We tell our consular sections at our U.S. embassies and consulates abroad basically how it is that they should adjudicate visas. We dictate things like which applications are required, which documents are required, that sort of thing. We also receive questions from consular officers adjudicating applications when they have case-specific questions, and we ensure that our guidance and policy procedural information that we give them is accurate and up to date. The visa office also does a lot of outreach events like this one to students as well as U.S. school officials to tell them about the visa application process. So before applying for a student visa, the applicant should have received their Form I-20 from the U.S. school they were accepted to and planned to attend, and they also should have paid the SEVIS fee. SEVIS is Student and Exchange Visitor Information System, and that fee is paid at the fmjfee.com website.
Okay, and what about scheduling a visa interview?
So you'll schedule your visa interview at a U.S. embassy or consulate. That is the next step. And we encourage applicants to apply as early as possible. You can go to our website, travel.state.gov, and from there you can access the online visa application form, DS-160, and you'll need to complete that. You can also find information about wait times for an appointment at each embassy or consulate. Wait times do vary by location as well as the season and visa category. So I urge you to apply as early as possible for your student visa.
Okay, interesting. And so would the next step be to actually go to the consulate?
Yes. So you'll go, actually, the next step would be to consult the website of the embassy or consulate where you plan to apply. And that will have more specific information on how to apply, including how to schedule your visa interview appointment and how to pay the non-refundable visa application fee, which is currently $160. As a recommendation, I would stress that you do not book airline tickets until you've actually been issued a student visa.
That makes a lot of sense. So once a student has the I-20 form from the U.S. school that they were admitted to and plans to attend the school, pays the student and exchange visitor system fee at fmjfee.com, completes the DS-160 form at travel.state.gov, and schedules a visa interview on a U.S. embassy or consulate's website, what comes next? Can you tell us more maybe about the interview process itself, the interview?
So sure, on the day of the student visa interview, the student would need to bring several things with to the interview. First, you're going to need to bring your original Form I-20 that was issued and provided to you by the school that you will attend. You'll also need to bring the Form DS-160 Visa Application Form Confirmation page. You'll need to bring your passport, as well as one photo, the visa application fee receipt, as well as any additional documents that the embassy or consulate where you will apply may have as requested on their website.
So the embassy and consulate could ask for like specific documents? Yes,
they could, and the applicant can find out what those documents are by checking the website.
Okay, and what happens then at the interview?
So at the interview, the applicant's fingerprints will be collected electronically. Fingerprints may be taken by the consular officer who will interview you or by another member of staff, and this will depend on the location where you apply.
Okay, thank you. So Laura, what's it like for a visa applicant once he or she is at the window with a consular officer and the actual process, the actual interview begins?
Sure. So during the interview with the consular officer, the student must establish to the officer that he or she is qualified to be issued a student visa. And during the interview, the consular officer is generally going to focus on 4 factors. First, who you are. And what it is you want to do. And with these 2, the consular officer is looking at your ties to your home country and also really what your story is. They may ask you things like what it is you plan to study in the United States and why. And really with these kinds of questions, the officer is looking to establish that you are in fact a bona fide student, that you truly intend to study in the United States. The consular officer will also be evaluating how it is you plan to pay for your studies. And a student must demonstrate that they have liquid finances or assets to cover the first year of their program, and then they should have a plan in place for how they plan to pay for the remaining years of the program. The final factor is what it is you intend to do after you have completed your studies. That's the last thing the consular officer will be considering. The interview itself will probably only last for a few minutes, so applicants really need to be ready to talk to the consular officer when they are called up to the interview window. We know that you may be nervous, and we will definitely try to put you at ease, but we don't have very long to talk to each applicant, so we need applicants to be ready to listen to our questions and answer as honestly and completely as they can. It is okay, though, to ask for clarification if there's a question that you do not understand.
That's very valuable advice. And, having been on that, having done consular work, I absolutely want to emphasize students need to be, as organized as possible, quick as possible, right? But try not to be nervous. This is a conversation. The consul is there to, we have an interest in seeing students come to the United States. The consul is there to do a thorough job, but there's nothing to be nervous about.
Yeah, absolutely, that's true.
Thank you. So Laura, that was a lot of great information. Lee, could I turn to you now to give us some insight on the university or college's role during this process?
Yeah, so Laura already highlighted very well what students can expect during the interview process. So just from a school's perspective, I would repeat what she said early on. Don't wait to apply for your visa. There's a certain point that you can't apply too early, but once you are able to apply, don't leave it until the last minute. It will impact your ability to get your tickets, to get here. And sometimes some consulates are busier than others, so you want to make sure that you're not stuck scrambling to get in for an appointment at the last minute. So do apply as soon as you can, then it's over and done, you don't have to worry. One other thing from a school perspective, just to help you weed out good schools versus maybe not so great schools and help you tell who's going to be able to support you well as an international student. A good school is going to have information on their website and in other resources, maybe webinars, exactly what we're talking about today, what to expect with the visa application process, sort of walk you through it again, much as Laura's already said. Also referring you to the Department of State website, for their instructions as well. So that's the kind of thing that you can look for to help you prepare when you're getting ready for those visa interviews.
Thank you very much, Lee. That's great advice. And ladies, both of you, for sharing some very valuable information. I also want to mention that Education USA, around the world, we have more than 425 advising centers in 180 countries around the world, hundreds of advisors who are there also ready to assist and to be able to help with questions that you have, and even point you, be able to refer to consular officers with additional questions if you have them. So don't forget Education USA. Let's now go to our Facebook questions. So the first question we are getting is, what is the processing time for an in-country J1 visa holder to change status to an F1, so an exchange visitor to an F1 student visa? It's quite a question.
It is quite a question, and actually the answer is the State Department doesn't have any role in that process. So if you're in the United States and let's say you're on a J1 visa or another visa category and you want to change status to become an F1 student, that's actually a process that is handled by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. So if that's your situation that you need to apply for a change of status, you'll want to look to USCIS's website for more information and how long the processing time may be for that process.
Because it's changing a status, right? It's not really the visa issue,
Exactly.
It's changing status from
Exactly.
a J status to an F status.
Exactly.
Got it. So our next question seems related, which is, I have a tourist visa. I want to convert it to a student visa. Is this possible?
So again, if this individual is in the United States, that would be the change of status process with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Now, if you are outside of the United States and you now need a student visa, there's no conversion process whereby we could change your B visa somehow to an F1 visa. That requires the student to actually apply for the student visa to go through the full application process.
So outside the U.S., you apply for a visa.
Exactly.
Got it. It's just a different category.
Yes.
Okay, the next question we have is it possible for international students studying in the U.S. to work while they're studying? Good question.
So it is possible. I know that it's possible in some situations, and it's going to depend. That is something that a student would generally have to discuss with their designated school official. Perhaps Lee would have more to say on that topic.
Absolutely. Lee.
Yes, absolutely. So if you're going to be here in F1 status, meaning you've got the I-20 form, yes, you can work on campus for the university where you're enrolled. There are rules about how many hours, so you're limited to 20 hours a week when the semester is in session. You can go up to 40 hours a week when it's a break, such as the summer break or winter break. If you're in J1 status, it's similar. You just need to go through a different process to get permission from your international office to work on campus through a special letter. Now, if you're asking about off-campus employment, it's a little bit different, and there are a lot more restrictions on that, which I won't go into because we don't have near enough time for that topic. But you can look on the website of the schools that you're interested in, and they'll have information on things like CPT, curricular practical training, or OPT, optional practical training, which are ways students can work in internships off campus sometimes.
Thank you very much, Lee. And we know that those internship opportunities are very attractive to all kinds of students, including international students. And it's one of the great benefits of American higher education that, in fact, it's not just about academic learning, it's also practically applied learning that students have exposure to and experience with. Thank you, Lee. Appreciate that. Our next question is, can one apply for a student visa if one has been refused a tourist visa?
So the answer to that question is yes. You may absolutely apply for a student visa, even if you have in the past been refused for a tourist visa. So first of all, the requirements are different for a student visa than for a tourist visa. And I'd additionally add that, whatever your situation may have been when you applied for the tourist visa in terms of your ties to your home country, this sort of thing, those factors may have changed since you last applied for the visitor visa, and you may qualify, in fact, for a student visa.
Okay, interesting. Interesting. So basically, you can keep applying, right?
Yes. Yes. So I mean, even once you apply for your student visa, if you are denied, you could reapply. While you might not have been able to establish that you qualify at the first interview, during the second interview, the student might be able to establish that they qualify.
But you would want to probably show that some circumstances have changed, or be able to talk to certain questions, right? Yeah,
that is true. I mean, to make it worthwhile, the best case is when you can demonstrate that your circumstances have changed, that there's been some change to show why you now qualify.
Got it. Got it. Okay, our next question is, are there special regulations for former permanent residents who've been out of the U.S. for a number of years but want to return to study?
So that, I would say, is a very sort of person-specific question. I might not be able to fully answer it. I would say a student in that situation should consult our website first, travel.state.gov, and could even contact their local embassy or a consulate to ask a bit further.
It sort of really depends if they're still a resident or not.
Yeah,
right?
that would be a factor.
Right. Thank you. That's so consult the embassy. Yeah. And for many very specific questions, consular sections are there and can be contacted by email and by telephone in many cases.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So a question for Lee now. What information do you give to students who've been accepted to a university but who didn't get a visa, who were denied a visa?
That's a great question. First, I'll say it is rare that we do see many visa denials, fortunately, with most of our incoming students who are admitted. So if that's helps to reassure people. And then, just like Laura said a few minutes ago, sometimes you may not get it during the first interview, but if you try again, there may be something different that comes up, or maybe you're better able to give the information that the visa officer needs. So, then you may be successful that time. But if you are denied during your visa application, you should be giving something in writing. That's standard practice, and that will explain the reason behind the denial. Sometimes it relates to that issue where you sort of have to prove that you have a tie to your home country, that you're not planning to just come and stay forever in the U.S. That can be one of the more difficult things to prove sometimes, but there are things evidence you can provide, like family connections, things like that. But that's the kind of situation that your university really is not going to be able to help you with. That's something that you kind of have to prove on your own. But if the denial is because maybe there's confusion about something such as your financial documentation or your admission material from your university, absolutely, that's what the international office can help you with. So be sure to let your international office know and provide them with a copy of whatever written denial reason you've been given, and then they'll see what they can do to help you out.
Thank you, Lee. We have another question for you from our online viewers. Can you tell us some of the things that universities can and can't do during this process?
Yeah, again, it goes back to maybe the reason for a denial. Universities can't just contact a consulate on your behalf. The consulate will work with you. They won't work with universities, and there's good reason for that. So a lot of students may ask us, oh, can you contact the consulate and tell them this or that? It really doesn't work that way. So that's not an expectation to have for your university. But like I said, if you do have, first of all, a good university will have a walkthrough and a description of what's involved with the application process. They're not going to tell you what to say. You should always beware of anybody who's going to tell you, say this or use these words during your visa interview. That's not a good practice. But they can still let you know what to expect, how to prepare. And then if there is a denial, like I said earlier, certainly contact the international office, give them information on what happened. They may or may not be able to help you out depending on what's going on.
Thank you very much, Lee. That's very good advice. Well taken. So our next question is for Laura. What are the most common reasons that a student visa could be denied?
So I would say there's primarily two. So Lee already talked about some of the reasons, but the specific refusal itself is under Section 214B of the Immigration and Nationality Act. And a student will be refused under this section of law probably most often if they cannot establish their intent to depart the United States and return to their residence overseas at the conclusion of their studies. And this is part of immigration law, so this is something very important. This is something that the consular officer does have to be satisfied that the student will do before they can approve the visa. So yes, Section 214B. Under Section 221G of the Immigration and Nationality Act, a student visa application may be refused if further administrative processing is required after the visa interview itself. Now, this is a refusal, but it may in fact be later followed by a visa approval and the visa actually being issued. So students who are told that their visa is being refused under 221G for administrative processing, it's very important that they keep listening to what the consular officer is telling them during the visa interview. The student may be told there's something additional that they need to provide, perhaps some additional document or more information, in which case the consular section would be waiting to hear from the student before they continue processing. Or it could be something that the consular section really is doing on the back end from their own side, in which case the student would be told, wait until you hear from us. And then we'd get back to the student and let them know.
So it's a refusal, but one that has to be paid very close attention to, because it could then not be a refusal.
Exactly. Under Section 221G, if you're refused for that reason, that refusal may be overturned once the administrative processing is complete, and the visa may then be issued later.
And the consular officer will tell the student exactly
Yes.
what's going on, if they need something, if they just need to wait a while.
Exactly.
And that when they'll hear, more or less.
Exactly. You'd be told if we need something more from you or if we just need you to wait.
Got it. Okay. A related question, do you need a second interview if there's administrative processing?
So the consular officer would let the student know if we need to interview them further.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. All right, very good question from our viewers. What are the English language requirements for admission to a U.S. university? I'd be interesting to hear from both of you. Lee, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, it's going to be different at each university. Each university sets their own specific rules. Most will require something called the TOEFL, the Test of English as a Foreign Language. That's the most common English test that's accepted at the majority of U.S. schools. For example, at the University of Iowa, we do have a minimum TOEFL admission of 80 if it's via the computer, the internet-based test. Although we do have sort of an extra layer where people need to get 100 or above. Otherwise, we have people do some additional testing on our campus once you get here. There's also a test called IELTS, which can be used as a substitute test for TOEFL. So schools will publish what their IELTS minimum requirements are. So if you look at the admissions websites of the universities that you're interested in, they will tell you what their particular English requirements are.
Thank you, Lee. That's to be admitted. And for a visa, is there an English language standard?
So the student, once they are issued their Form I-20 by the school, it's going to say whether or not English is required for their specific program. So if the I-20 is marked in that way, that English is required, then the consular officer will likely conduct the interview in English.
Got it. But there could be programs, for example, where people are coming to learn English.
That's true.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, English is a second language program, in which case the I-20 is generally not marked, that the student would have English proficiency in advance. And for those programs, we would generally just interview in the student's language.
Native. That's fantastic. Thank you. Next, also a very practical question. Is there an age limit to apply for a student visa?
There's no age limit to apply for a student visa. No. And, of course, we're talking to Lee today from, probably a, traditional U.S. college. But there's lots of types of student programs out there. So the ages that we see applying for student visas run the gamut, from quite young to older.
Lee, do you want to quickly comment about the ages of students, that there's a full range of ages who come to the U.S. to study?
Absolutely there is. Most of our undergraduates do average, starting out around age 18. But I can give you an example. We've got a 3-week program in the summers for literature and writing programs. And most of those students are in their 40s, 50s, even 60s. So you truly do have a range. And then particularly if you're talking about graduate studies or professional studies, such as getting a master's or PhD or maybe your JD, then certainly those students are, 20s, 30s, even in their 40s.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, there's absolutely no discrimination on the basis of age. Absolutely not. Our next question from our viewers: how far in advance of your study can you arrive in the United States? Does it depend on what kind of visa you have? Laura, can I turn to you?
So for all the categories of student visas, F visa, M visa, and even students on J1 programs, it's 30 days. You can arrive no sooner than 30 days in advance of your program start date.
30 days in advance. And what about departing the United States?
So for F1 students and M1 students, it's 60 days. You need to depart no later than 60 days after your program end date. And for students on J1 exchange visitor programs, it's 30 days. They need to depart no later than 30 days after their program end date.
Thank you. Very practical advice. Is there a minimum tuition fee to qualify for an F1 visa?
No. So again, we recognize that different schools will have they'll charge different things for tuition. That's not a factor in determining whether the student qualifies for a visa. We do need to see, as I said earlier, that you can pay for your studies, that you have funding available to pay for that first year, and that there's a plan for how to pay for the remaining years of the program. But there's no minimum for what the school would be charging you for tuition in terms of qualifying for a visa.
That's up to the school, and if they can then issue the I-20.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. All right, we have a specific question on J1, exchange visitor visas, and about a 2-year residency requirement. Is there a requirement to return to your home country following on an F1 visa and I guess a J1? So F1 student visa, J1 exchange visitor visa. Can you talk about the requirements
Sure.
to return home linked to the visa?
Sure. So this question is getting at the 2-year home country physical presence requirement, which is something that certain J1 exchange visitors are subject to. And it's something that we annotate on your visa, and it's marked on the exchange visitors form DS 2019. And it's something that their school official would also be able to advise them about if it's a requirement that they are subject to. So exchange visitors who are subject to this 2-year rule, they are expected to return to their home country for 2 years before applying to get a U.S. visa again, but only in certain visa categories. F1 students are not subject to this 2-year home country physical requirement ever. That's only on the J1 side and only for certain exchange visitors.
So certain exchange visitors, J1s, there's a requirement to go home at the end of the program, linked to the visa itself. You won't get another visa if you don't.
Yeah.
But for an F1, that's not the case. But of course, when student status ends generally, students do have to go home, but they could get a tourist visa.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And
yeah, of course, everyone is expected to depart the United States at the conclusion of their temporary stay here. That's a given. But with that 2-year home country physical presence requirement, it just means that in some cases you may not be able to apply for a visa in certain other categories until you have fulfilled the 2 years.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much. And again, lots more information on the State Department's website,
Yes.
On our Consular Affairs website, and at embassies and consulates around the globe.
Yeah, I would add we have a lot of information about this 2-year rule on travel.state.gov. It is complicated, it is complex, we definitely recognize that, and there's a lot of information about it on our website, travel.state.gov.
Thank you. I think sort of a related question, do short-term summer exchanges require a J1, an exchange visa, or a B1, B2 visa? So tourism, essentially.
Yeah, it depends on what the program is going to be. So generally, if it's something that's kind of like a summer camp almost, like with an academic feel to it, that generally is permitted to be done on a B visa, on a tourist visa. That said, there's lots of different programs out there. If there's any academic credit being earned, that may not qualify to be done on a tourist visa. It would be determined, though, when the student actually applies for the visa, whether a B visa is appropriate or whether another visa category would be required.
Understand. I know that for our EducationUSA Academy, for most of the Academy programs, students are guided to apply for a B1, B2. And that is, the visa, the consular officer would assist with that, with the category determination.
That's right. The consular officer would assist with that and essentially decide what the appropriate visa classification is for the student's purpose of travel.
And the school would also, I assume, have thought about this.
Yes, the schools are generally well versed as well in this type of thing, and they generally already know what visa category is appropriate.
Lee, do you want to speak to that in terms of when a student comes to a school and says, what kind of visa should I apply for?
Yeah, absolutely. It is just as you all said, if there's going to be enrollment and academic credit, then absolutely something like the J1 student visa is needed. I can give you an example of what we use a B visitor visa for. We have a summer program where we bring in very talented students from China just to come observe and learn about the university. There's no academic enrollment. They're not getting any credit. It's just a campus visit over the course of a few weeks every summer, and we absolutely use the B visitor visa for that, and students do not have any problem getting those visas to come. So the universities should know the difference, just like you said.
Thank you very much, both. Okay, so our next question is, if you want to take a gap year before you start your studies, should you apply for your student visa before or after the gap year? Interesting question. Laura, can I?
So, yeah, I mean, really, you would have to apply after the gap year because if you're qualified for a student visa, we can issue it no sooner than 120 days before the program start date. So if you're taking a gap year, you would have to, wait until the end of that gap year, not the very last minute. As we said earlier, we want you to apply early, but later in the gap year.
Got it. Lee, anything, do you see that happening often? Do students request that? And does the school facilitate that gap year?
It doesn't happen that often for us, but things do come up. If something happens where you realize you can't attend, say, this fall semester, let your school know, because we do need to make changes with your I-20 and the CVIS system. Often a school can do what's called defer your admission, maybe to the spring semester or the following fall semester. And it's a fairly easy process, but you don't just want to decide not to come and not communicate with the school, because bad things can happen with your immigration record. We want to avoid that. But then it, like Laura said, it would have impact on your visa as well. So do plan and certainly communicate with the school if you can't come.
Very good advice for in life in general, right? Communicate, be clear about your intentions, let people know what's going on. So another good question for Lee from our viewer. The viewer is asking, if I change my major or degree program once I'm in the US and in school, do I need to let my DSO know? How does that work?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Just like American students, you can change your major, and it happens. I changed my major many, many times. International students can do that too. Yes, your DSO does need to know that. Now, a university like ours, where we have thousands of international students, likely has systems in place where once your major is changed within the university's electronic system, we get that information electronically. We update your I-20 to show, okay, now you're computer science major instead of biology, for instance, and it's a pretty easy process. Smaller schools, may not have that electronic capability, so you would have to let your DSO know so that they can go in and change your I-20, which should always reflect what your current major is. So it just depends on what the system is at the school you attend.
Thank you very much. So students need to be diligent, communicate, and quickly there's no problem in changing a major, but you have to let the school officials know, and it has to be officially recorded in the system. Okay, a question for Laura. How does Presidential Proclamation 9645 affect student visa applicants? To which nationalities does it apply?
Sure, I can talk some about the Presidential Proclamation. Before I get into the specifics, I definitely want to direct you to travel.state.gov. We have a lot of information about the proclamation on our website. And anyone who may be subject to the proclamation really should look at that information before they apply for a visa. Okay, so there's only 2 countries for which issuance of student and exchange visitor visas are restricted under the Presidential Proclamation, and those countries are North Korea and Syria. An individual who believes that he or she may be subject to travel restrictions under the proclamation, but would still like to travel to the United States, should review our website information, as I already said, travel.state.gov, and our website includes guidance for applicants who may be eligible for exceptions and would therefore not be subject to travel restrictions under the proclamation. And these exceptions include any national who was in the United States on the applicable effective date of the proclamation for their nationality, as well as any national who had a valid visa on the applicable effective date of the proclamation for their nationality. An individual who may be subject to the proclamation should still apply for a visa and disclose during their visa interview any information that might qualify them for an exception or for a waiver of the proclamation. In coordination with the consular section management at the embassy or consulate where you apply, and following any required administrative processing, a consular officer will carefully review each case to determine if the applicant is affected by the proclamation, and if so, whether that applicant would qualify for a waiver.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next question, very practical. While in the U.S. on a student visa, can I travel domestically? Can I travel internationally? Let me turn to Laura for the technical answer.
Yeah. So you can absolutely travel domestically anywhere within the United States. That's a non-issue, no problem. International travel is permitted as well. In terms of your visa, you'll want to check what the validity is. So if the visa may expire while you're outside the United States, or if your visa has already expired, you would need to apply for a new visa outside the United States at one of our U.S. embassies or consulates in order to return to the United States. Another thing to keep in mind is how long you're going to be gone from the United States, right? How long you're going to be outside the United States. And I know that that's something important that the student would need to talk about with their designated school official before embarking on international travel.
Got it. So bottom line, even if you're in status, even if you're validly here studying, if your visa is expired, you can't come back without a new visa.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Got it. So and the whole process, the student needs to go through again, right? The
Yes.
I-20 and be ready for the interview
Yes.
and to show your studying and
Yes. I mean, we don't want to discourage, right? We don't want to discourage students from going home or from traveling outside the United States, but it's something very important to keep in mind that they are going to need to factor in where they're going to apply for the visa, that they have enough time to do that. That sort of thing. And that would be another important thing as well to discuss with their DSO if they have any questions.
Thank you. Lee, let me turn to you and just say, I assume this is a very common thing. Students go home all the time.
Oh, absolutely. Particularly when it's winter break, spring break, or the summer. You know, you'll always need to talk to your DSO, your international advisor, before you leave. You may need travel signatures on your I-20 or your DS 2019 if you're J1 status, and your international advisors will give that to you, as well as information on what you need to do if you have to renew your visa, things like that. One other thing to consider, if you're going somewhere that's not your home country, you need to make sure you're checking on whether you have visa requirements to get into that country. Sometimes we have students who plan to vacation somewhere in a country that's not their home country of citizenship and discover, oh, they needed a visa to get into that country. So sometimes students think, well, I've got my US visa, so I can travel anywhere, which that's not the case. Every country has their own visa requirements. So you need to make sure you look into that when you're making your travel plans, just to make sure you don't get stuck at the border.
Thank you. Absolutely. So organize carefully.
And if I could just add one more thing with regard to applying for a visa, you know, for example, if you need to, you know, if you're just going, let's say you're traveling to Mexico or to Canada and your visa is expired, definitely look into that in advance. Check the websites for the embassies and consulates in Canada and Mexico and see what the requirements are for a visa interview there. Some of these locations have different procedures and policies than, say, our consulates and embassies in Europe. You know, because of the proximity to the United States, the rules of processing are different. So students really should look into that in advance and consider carefully whether they can apply for a visa, another U.S. visa in Canada or Mexico, and whether they want to.
Right. And I assume wait times could be very long.
Wait times could be very long, absolutely.
So, okay, excellent advice. I do want to say that, you know, from a personal standpoint, travel in the United States domestically is extremely enriching, and many students we know do that to see, you know, the beauty of the United States, and it's, you know, part and parcel of and educational experiences to take advantage of everything the country offers as a whole. And that, the U.S. Communities across the country are sending a strong message of welcome through the You Are Welcome Here campaign, as well as schools across the nation to international students. Our next question is, again, from an online viewer. Is it easier to get a U.S. visa if a student has a scholarship from a university? Laura, is there any link between a scholarship and a visa?
The process is the same. So the things we've already talked about, how you qualify for the student visa, the kinds of questions the consular officer is going to ask of the student during the visa interview. The process is actually exactly the same, whether you have a scholarship or whether you don't.
Got it. Lee, any link a school sees?
No, not really. It just means that you would have to show less personal financial documentation. When the I-20 is made for you, it actually shows exactly how much funding you're able to show, and that funding could include personal bank statements from yourself or your parents. It includes scholarship information. So ultimately what really matters is that in total you've got enough funding to meet whatever the school tuition and fees and living expenses are going to add up to.
Excellent advice. Our next question: if my student visa is valid for 5 years, but my passport is only valid for the next 3 years, what do I do once my passport expires? I bet you get that question a lot, Laura.
We do. We get that question a lot, not just from students. So in the situation where you have a visa that is still valid and a passport that is expired, the visa is still valid. So what you do is you basically travel with both passports. The expired passport with the still valid visa, plus your new passport. You travel with both of those.
Okay, very good advice. So travel with both documents. And I assume that the page the visa is on should not be stamped through, or that visa should be intact.
Yeah, optimally, don't let anybody do anything to the visa when they're canceling your old passport, and don't rip it out or anything like that. Just carry both passports. If you prefer, of course, to have the visa placed in your new passport, then you have to go apply for a new visa.
Yeah, so it's not just a matter of putting it in, it's the whole process, right?
Exactly.
So just carry 2 passports.
Carry 2 passports.
Easiest thing.
Yes.
Got it. Our next question is, does the university I choose affect my ability to get a visa? So is there a link between the school and a visa?
So no, our adjudication standards, the requirements to qualify are the same. So for example, if you're seeking to attend, let's say, a community college, or you're seeking to attend a more traditional 4-year school, the requirements for how you qualify are the same. The factors that the consular officer is looking at are the same. So it's the same across the board. We're not treating one somehow better than the other. We're treating them the same.
You're looking at the student's intent and just what to study, like the whole picture.
Exactly.
But the school is, as long as the school can issue the required I-20 DS forms, that's what matters.
We're not assessing the school that you're seeking to apply. We're assessing your credibility as a student and whether you qualify for the visa.
Got it. And let me add from an Education USA perspective, we promote all accredited U.S. colleges and universities across the country, in all 50 states and territories. And there are over 4,700 schools that are accredited in the United States for higher education, and we encourage students, our advisors are out there helping students find the right fit for each individual. So very important to know those resources are there. We want students to understand the great variety and that there is the perfect school for everybody at somewhere in the United States. So a question from someone who's watching with a viewing group at our Education USA Center in Maracaibo, Venezuela. Thank you so much. What kind of visa do I need for an ESL program? Can I bring dependents with me for this kind of program? Laura, let me turn to you first.
Sure. So English is a second language program. They typically will be issued forms I-20 by the school that they're going to attend, by the school that they're seeking to attend. And with that I-20, then you apply for an F1 student visa. This person also asked about family members and whether it's possible to bring them with. You can bring, if you're married, you can bring your spouse, as well as any young children, right? So I believe under the age of 18 versus grown adult children, those who cannot bring,
they don't
right?
come.
But minor children, you can absolutely bring them. Parents don't qualify as derivatives, and neither do brothers and sisters. But your spouse, as well as any young children, can come with.
And it has to be a legally married spouse?
Yes.
Got it. And minor children. Okay. Lee, quickly to you. Do you see students bringing legally married spouses and minor children, and any insight on these kind of particular English as a second language programs?
Yes, absolutely. And we do have a very strong ESL program here at the University of Iowa, and many students do bring their spouses, and some have children. With our degree programs, we tend to see that more with our graduate students, graduate and professional students who are married and have kids. So many people do bring dependents. The school system here is fantastic when you have younger kids. There are also, we try to have activities for spouses. For example, there's a club that's been around for over 50 years called the International Women's Club, which is specifically started for spouses. You know, many years ago, it used to be the males were coming here to study or work, and the spouses, the wives, had not a lot to do. So this club exists to give people, you know, opportunities for social interaction. They do some of their own informal English practice, things like that. So many schools will have programs that help support spouses while they're here.
That's fantastic, and I hope that these days we also have members who are women who are coming to study, who bring their husbands, who then join a club or something similar. That's our reality. If someone was previously denied a student visa, is our next question, how long would he or she have to wait to reapply? If you're denied, you know, is there a rule about how long you should wait to reapply?
So there is no rule. There's no set amount of time that you would have to wait before you reapply. We were talking about this earlier. In the event that you are denied and wish to reapply, you should be able to show that there's been some change in your situation or circumstances. So what does that mean? You wouldn't want to come in and apply the very next day following a denial, because probably there has not been a change in your circumstances in just one day. But when you feel that there has been a change and when you're ready to reapply, that is when you could schedule again another appointment.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. Our next question is, can parents accompany younger students to the visa interview? So in the visa interview itself?
So the interview, as I think I sort of insinuated earlier, it's just at a counter, so they're generally not going into an office or somewhere separate. But yeah, I mean, if you have an elementary age child or middle school, maybe even high school, it's generally fine that the parent come up to the window.
But a 25-year-old?
No, we wouldn't expect you to have your parent with you if you're 25 years old, or really, I think, over the age of 18.
Right.
We're looking at the student as an adult at that point, and you know, expecting them to be able to come and interview by themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. All right, our next question is, if I get a visa for one university, but then decide to attend another one, can I enter the US and go to the other university with the visa I already have, or do I need to get a new visa?
So if you change, basically if you're deciding to change schools before you've even entered the United States, then you would need to apply again for another student visa. When we issue a student visa, we basically annotate on the visa itself. It's typed on the visa, the school that you're going to attend, as well as the CVIS ID number. And when you enter at the port of entry, the Customs and Border Protection officials, they're expecting you to have the I-20 for the school that's marked on the visa. So if you've changed, if you've decided to attend another school while you're still outside the United States, then you would need to reapply for the visa.
But once you're in the US and already studying, If you change schools,
Yes.
it's different.
It's different. So, you know, if after you're here for some amount of time and you decide to change schools, if your visa is still valid at that point, you could use it to re-enter with an I-20 from a school other than the one that's annotated on the visa. Again, Customs and Border Protection, they're going to be checking their systems to verify your status, to verify the school that you're currently at. But yeah, subsequent entries are okay with a visa that's marked or annotated for another school.
Thank you, Laura. Lee, anything you want to add from the school's perspective in terms of students at any point, changing their enrollment?
Yeah, just reinforce exactly what Laura said. You know, we don't want students to have problems with being considered to make a fraudulent entry. So when you have not yet come to the U.S. and you know you're going to attend somewhere else, you need to make changes to get a new I-20 because that visa is also connected to the specific I-20 that the first university issued you. So if you're going to go to University B, they need to give you a new I-20 and then you need to get a new visa based on that. So do plan if something changes and you're not going to attend the first school, try to address that before you even get here.
Thank you. Our next question is, are students able to apply for a student visa in a country outside of their home country? So not in their home country, but in a third country. Laura?
And the answer to that question is yes. This is especially relevant for students where their home country doesn't have an embassy. In those cases, they have no choice. They have to apply at an embassy or consulate outside of their home country. But the process itself is the same. They'd want to check on travel.state.gov for what the wait times are for that other U.S. embassy or consulate, and then they'd want to look at the website for the U.S. embassy or consulate for more details about how to apply at that location, where and how to pay the application fee, and any other details.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. So we have come to our final question. Who decides whether an applicant is eligible for a J1 or an F1? I guess who makes the distinction between those visa categories?
Well, if we sort of go to the beginning of the process where the student has selected a particular school, kind of the school will almost decide which visa classification is appropriate. If they have SCVP certification to issue I-20s, they may issue you an I-20, whereas if they have Department of State designation as an exchange visitor program sponsor, they may issue a DS 2019.
For the J visa.
Exactly. So it'll depend really on which form you get. If you get an I-20, you'll apply for an F1 visa. If you get a DS 2019, you'll apply for a J1 visa.
Thank you, Laura. Lee, from the school's perspective, do you want to comment on that decision?
Yeah, sure. Most of our students come on F1 visas. To be eligible for a J, you have to meet certain criteria. Not everyone can just get a J1 student visa. So for the most part, the students coming here on Js may be participating in official exchange programs that we have. They may be coming on government-funded scholarships, either from the home government or the state of Iowa or the U.S., or maybe funded by the sponsor, which would be us, the University of Iowa. So part of that is what goes into play, whether or not someone gets an F1 or J1.
Thank you, Lee. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time. I would like to invite each one of you to share a final thought for our friends on Facebook. Lee, could I turn to you first?
Yeah, I think you've just been given a lot of good information to get started with and to plan for that visa interview and what to expect in the first days that you're going to be preparing to come to the U.S. Again, the university that you plan to attend should have good information for you online in webinar format. So be sure to look for things like that because that can really help prepare you to get here.
Thank you, Lee, and to the University of Iowa for your fantastic input today. Laura?
final thoughts, definitely go to our website, travel.state.gov, for more information on applying for a visa. We really do urge you to look at our information there as the official U.S. government source on how to apply for a visa. And then finally, please apply early. We don't want you to wait to the last minute. It will not be to your benefit to wait to the last minute, so do apply as early as you can.
Thank you so much, Laura and Lee. We really appreciate your perspectives and excellent advice. And thank you to our viewers joining us from around the world. And a very special thanks to our viewing groups gathered around the world, including the American Space in Sao Paulo, Brazil, the American Resource Center in Chisinau in Moldova, IBEO Ceará Binational Center in Brazil, the Education USA Advising Center in Guadalajara, Mexico, and the American Center in Moscow, Russia. We also have the American Space in Santiago de Chile and Education USA in Maracaibo, Venezuela. To learn more about studying in the United States, visit the Education USA website at www.educationusa.state.gov. There you can find information on the 5 steps to U.S. study, locate an Education USA center in your country, one of over 426 in the world, connect with us via social media, learn both about in-person and virtual upcoming events, research financial aid opportunities, and much more. Thank you, and please join us for future Education USA interactive web chats. Goodbye from Washington.